Hello everyone and welcome back to the Ryan Retro channel. In this episode we're going to be comparing versions of games on different systems. And make sure you stick around to the end of the video because we have a big one. We'll be comparing original games against their remakes and some cross-platform games to see how they run on different systems. We'll be checking the graphics, the performance, the controls, and just how they generally feel to play. So let's jump into the first game, The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker on GameCube and the HD remaster on Wii U. Here I'm back at the beginning of the game because I foolishly forgot to save my progress, but I can tell you it runs at a very smooth 30 frames per second and it looks beautiful. This is, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful games ever made, and the GameCube version looks incredible on the Retroid Pocket 5's OLED screen. I really enjoyed playing this game, and it's a perfectly smooth experience. This is a game I tried to emulate in the past on different consoles, and I sometimes ran into some issues. But here on the Retroid Pocket 5, in the Dolphin emulator, it's running beautifully. Jumping into the Wii U version now, it looks incredible, but it does sometimes lose frames. You'll see up here the frame rate is mostly at 30 frames per second, sometimes going a little higher, sometimes going a little lower, and I have not gotten as far into the game on this version. I'm still around the starting area, and it's mostly running well, but I do notice some fluctuations in frame rate and it does slow down and stutter just a little bit. I'm going to have to test how it goes when we get further into the game, but it seems like it might slow down and stutter just a bit when it's loading in shaders. It's definitely playable, it's definitely nice, and it looks incredible. So I'd say in this case, both versions are very playable, but personally I would choose the GameCube version because I think it looks incredible and it runs absolutely perfectly. So let's move on to the next game. Mario Kart 8 on the Wii U versus Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the Switch. In both cases, we'll jump into a single player game. I'm just going to keep smashing the A button. So we're choosing Mario with the same car, the same settings, everything will be the same for testing purposes. So first of all, this is the Wii U version. I've played a few races on this so far and it's been an incredible experience. You'll see the frame rate fluctuating between 50 and 60 frames per second. It's mostly smooth at 60. It does sometimes drop down to 50, but to me 50 frames per second still feels and looks smooth. I don't notice it jumping or stuttering too much. It's a really good, really solid experience. Once again, jumping into a race with Mario, this time on the Switch. In this case, you're going to notice some stutters and slowdowns. The frame rate is fluctuating around 40 frames per second, but it sometimes drops in the 20s, sometimes goes up to 50 or 60. In this case, it's a much less smooth experience than on the Wii U, and honestly, I think it graphically looks about the same. So when it comes to Mario Kart, I would prefer to play the Wii U version, which runs flawlessly. I definitely wouldn't call the Switch version unplayable, as it runs around 40 to 45 frames per second on average, but it definitely feels noticeably less smooth than the Wii U version. So if you wanted to pick one of them, I would go with the Wii U version in this case. Next up, we have the Simpsons Hit and Run, PlayStation 2 versus GameCube. You can see right now we're running at around 50 frames per second, and this is on the PlayStation 2 version of the game. It runs mostly smooth, it's nice to play, and it looks great. You can also see we have it set up to run in widescreen, so it's nice that it's filling up the whole screen. Now this is the GameCube version of the game. You'll see we're running in a 4:3 aspect ratio this time. I'm sure you could also switch it to widescreen if you wanted, I just haven't gone through and set that up yet. And here we're getting much closer to a smooth 60 frames per second, and overall the game just feels a lot smoother on the GameCube version. I'm not sure if that's to do with the game itself or the emulator we're using, but for the Simpsons Hit and Run, I would recommend using the Dolphin emulator and playing the GameCube version. It just feels smoother overall, and it's delightful to play on the Retroid Pocket 5. Next we have Slay the Spire, the Android version versus the Switch version. The Android version of Slay the Spire works really well on the Retroid Pocket 5, but the problem is there's no controller support. So unfortunately, you do just have to use the touchscreen for everything. So while the game runs very well on the Retroid Pocket 5, it's just not a very fun experience having to use the touchscreen. This is not what the device is really for. Now moving over to the Nintendo Switch version of Slay the Spire, this is much better. It natively has controller support, and the game runs beautifully on the Retroid Pocket 5. This is a fantastic Slay the Spire machine, and I've already put tens of hours into this game on the Retroid Pocket 5. It's glorious. Take that. Next up, we have Zelda Skyward Sword on the Wii versus Skyward Sword HD on the Switch. This one's a bit tricky because the Wii uses all motion controls. And as you can see here, I have set up the gyroscope on the Retroid Pocket to move around the cursor as I move it. But it's not perfect because this is not what the device was made for. You can definitely go into the settings more, tinker with it and play around with it, but it's not particularly comfortable. So let's see if we can throw this barrel through this window by rocking the Retroid Pocket 5. Ready? Go! Nope. Whew. There we go. It is pretty fun, but it's not how I'd really like to play the game. Oh, and we're in trouble. What do you think you're doing? Ooh. The Nintendo Switch Remaster, on the other hand, is built with a controller in mind, so this one runs beautifully. The graphics are not too different from the original game, so it runs very easily on the Retroid Pocket 5. We're at a solid 60 frames per second, it's built with controller support in mind, so it runs beautifully. In this case, I would definitely recommend the HD Remaster on the Switch. It clearly wins this round because it's far easier to control and much more suited to a gamepad device like the Retroid Pocket 5. Next up, we have Zelda Twilight Princess on the GameCube versus Zelda Twilight Princess HD on the Wii U. Growing up, I had this game on the Wii, and what you're seeing right now is actually the Wii version. It runs fine, but once again, I'm worried about the controller issue, so instead of testing the Wii version, we're going to jump into the GameCube version. This is the GameCube version, and as you can see, we're running at a solid 30 frames per second. Everything's running very well. We have the 4:3 aspect ratio. It looks really good. GameCube games really hold up well. It's a very solid experience, it's very smooth, and it's lovely to play. Now jumping into the Wii U version, once again it runs absolutely perfectly. We now have a 16:9 aspect ratio. We once again have a very solid 30 frames per second. And I do like the updates in UI over the GameCube version. I find the A, B, X and Y buttons much clearer and easier to read. And when there's an instruction, such as to use an item or mount or dismount from the horse, they also repeat them at the bottom of the screen so it's nice and clear and easy to read. So in this case, I do prefer the Wii U version. But both are fantastic, both look great, both run smooth. It's going to come down to personal preference. Next up, we have Super Mario 3D All-Stars versus Super Mario Galaxy, Super Mario Sunshine, and Super Mario 64. Jumping into Super Mario 64 on the N64, you can see the text is almost impossible to read. It might be because the game's quite old and was made for CRT televisions, but I believe it's something I need to fix in the settings, so I will try and look into that more and fix it. But once we get into the game, it shouldn't be an issue. The text in the game itself is clear and easy to read, but we will compare that to the remake in a minute. Getting into the game now, the text once again is quite hard to read. I can read it, but it's definitely not very clear. Running around, you can see we've got a very smooth 30 frames per second. The game feels very fun. I can jump, I can slide, whee! It's been quite a few years since I played this game, but I remember it was a very fun game, so I am looking forward to getting back into it. But I need to decide if I should play it on the Nintendo 64 or the Switch Remake. So now let's jump into the Switch Remake and see how it compares. I'm especially interested to see what the text looks like. Jumping into the Switch Remake, you can see the text is perfectly clear. So if the performance is equally smooth at 30 frames per second, this will be a clear winner. Jumping into the game, we once again have that same smooth 30 frames per second. We can jump, we can slide, whee! It feels the same, it looks the same, but we have very readable text. So on this occasion, I definitely give this to the Switch Remake. One thing I can notice are very small black bars at the top and the bottom of the screen that I didn't notice on the N64 version. It's going to be pretty much impossible to see because of the way that the OLED screen so perfectly blends into the body of the Retroid Pocket 5, but when holding it at a certain angle, I do notice some very slight bars at the top and the bottom. Maybe that was in the N64 version and I just didn't notice. But in any case, it's not going to detract from the game at all, and I would choose this over the N64 version because of the clear text. I'm sure with a little research and time, you could fix that text issue in the N64 version, but straight out of the box, I prefer the Switch version. So now let's move into the next game in the same series. This is Super Mario Sunshine. Once again, we can jump, we can slide, whee! I showcased this in one of my previous videos and I mentioned how it was only running around 25 frames per second, and I was curious if I could get it up to 50. Unfortunately, I've not had any time to test that yet, but I do hope there's a way to get it to 50 frames per second. Once again, we have the 4:3 aspect ratio, everything runs very smoothly at 25 frames per second, and it feels very nice to play. So let's see how this compares to the Switch version. Jumping into the Nintendo Switch version now, there are some big slowdowns as it renders shaders. We now have a 16:9 aspect ratio and everything's looking pretty nice. Graphically, it looks much nicer than the GameCube version, but with that comes a hit in performance. It seems like we're going to struggle to get 30 frames per second in this, and we're even struggling to get 20 frames per second at times. For some games, it is possible to download shader cache files which will render all of these shaders for us and fix any stuttering issues. That's something I will look into in the future, but for now, I will say this is not running particularly well. I would not call it playable with this many slowdowns happening even at the beginning of the game, and in this case, I would definitely recommend you check out the original GameCube version. And now finally, we have Super Mario Galaxy. This is a game I've never played before. I have no idea what's going to happen, but this is a Wii game, so once again, we might have some issues with the controls. As you can see, I have the right stick corresponding to the Wiimote. Like how you would point the Wiimote around the screen, that's corresponding to this right analog stick. But then I set the A button, which usually confirms things, to this B button, so I have to try and push these at the same time. That's a bit of an oversight on my part. I probably should have set the A button to a trigger or something. So let's try and coordinate these buttons together, and then hopefully it will be easier once we get into the game. You could definitely spend some more time setting up the controls in a much smarter way than what I have, because this is definitely not the best idea. We now got into the game, so let's see if I can control it okay. I can run around, I can jump. I'm not sure how to slide, but I can curl up into a ball. This star is being controlled by the Wiimote, so I have to use the right stick. This seems very difficult, and I can already tell I'm not going to have fun playing this Wii version, so let's jump into the Switch version. Super Mario Sunshine didn't run very well on here, and with this being an even more modern game, I'm curious to see how it will do. In this case, we don't have motion controls, we can simply just tap on the screen, and with the Retroid Pocket 5 being a touchscreen, that's nice and easy to do. So going through the menus, this is much easier than the Wii version, but we just need to see if we have the performance when we get into the game. The Wii version seemed to be running very smoothly, it was just a little bit difficult to control. Jumping into the game, and it seems to be running in slow motion, so we're really struggling to run this. I'm going to go into the settings and drop the resolution down to 75%. After lowering the graphics settings, it seems to be exactly the same. We seem to be running in slow motion. Let's just quickly compare this once again to the Wii version to check that I'm not just going insane. Back to the Wii version, this is clearly much faster, much smoother, and working really well at 60 frames per second. The only issue is the controller, but there are some very smart people on YouTube and on the internet who have made controller profiles for all different Wii games. So this is a good point to put the console down and talk about my conclusion from my testing today. I would recommend that you play each game on the newest system that you can handle. If you can handle the game on a new system like the Switch, it's going to look the best, it's probably going to fit the screen without any widescreen patches or hacks necessary, the text is going to be perfectly clear, and it's going to look fantastic. If the Retroid Pocket 5 can't handle the Switch game, then drop down to the next console, whether that's the Wii or the GameCube or the PlayStation. If you're having problems with the control on the Wii, you can go into the Wii input settings and there is a lot here that you can customize. Sometimes you might play a game and it tells you have to connect a nunchuck. In that case, you can come down to Extension and choose Extension Nunchuck, and then you'll be able to play the game. If you're struggling with the controls like I was in this video, check out some YouTube guides where people will show you how to set up the controls properly. And in some cases, they will actually let you download their profile, which you can just import into your emulator and start using straight away. For me personally, I prioritize performance over everything else, and I'd rather play a game at a smooth 60 frames per second rather than one that looked a little bit better but lagged and stuttered. I hope today's videos were helpful in helping you decide which emulator to use and how to play certain games. I also hope it gave you some things to think about when it comes to emulation and can help you get the most out of your Retroid Pocket 5. So please like this video, share any comments or thoughts you might have below. I'd love it if you could subscribe to the channel, and if you'd like to buy your own Retroid Pocket 5 like I have here, I'll leave my affiliate link in the description to the official Retroid website, the same place I bought my one. Thank you so much for watching today, and have a lovely day. I'll see you tomorrow.